Hey, folks, welcome back to Crypto Heartbeat. It's been a while. It's summertime, and I was on the vacation with the family. A couple weeks of different locations provided incredible perspective. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is just perspective. And, we got the right guy to talk to today because it is Stephen Friday. We're back with episode 14 of Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. And the reason we're doing this, and the reason we've done this 14 episodes, is because when I first met Steve at a meetup for the Texan Token, it was in Dallas. Literally, I shook his hand and I was like, the Lord said to me, listen to this guy, like, pay attention. And I literally said, I was like, is he an angel? Which he just shows my naivete. But he is an angel to me. He is somebody who has been an incredible mentor and guide and just confidant and friend. And so I'm just really thankful for Steve. But one of the things that I think is incredible is that it's so important to have others who are helping provide perspective. And it's rare. It's rare to find someone that can be a mentor. Um, and it's another thing for that person to actually have a desire to be that type of person. And when I first met Steve, he said, I'm called the men of the transfer. And that's the thing that I've been so fascinated with, and I'm just so honored to have an opportunity to have these discussions with Steve, because this is what we talk about in private. We have phone conversations, and it's he jokes with me because I say to him, hey, you got a minute? And he's like, well, and he measures minutes by hours. And that's kind of how we do our discussions. But I'm going to welcome you into that for episode 14. We're going to bring in the man himself, Steve Staggs. Welcome back, Steve.
Hey guys, hello
Look,
all.
look at you, man. You're inspiring me to maybe, grow a gray beard like yours.
Well, I think I was telling you in the green room, I've been threatening to do this for a number of years, so we'll see if I actually am able to pull through to the end.
You're not going to buy a motorcycle, are you, anytime soon?
Nah, probably not in the next 2 weeks anyway.
Okay, very good. Now Brandon's doing the same thing. Of course, he's got the benefit of youth and the ginger red hair, but I love it. I love it. Well, welcome back here, Steve. Really excited about spending time with you. It's been several weeks. We've kind of been off here, back and forth with summertime stuff, but hopefully getting back into the groove of Right Side Up here. The whole purpose of this, Steve, has been really just a joy to have these open conversations with our friends. And it's had a tremendous impact on me. You've seen that, right? Because you've done
Yeah,
this quite a bit. But let's say hello to the folks that are here. Because we've got some folks that the usual suspects. Sam Kemp is number one. Been missing this. Well, we're back, and hopefully this will be um, joyful and beneficial to you as well. Michael Austell, me too, Sam. Welcome home, Matt. I'm here with my little face scrubbed, my ears clean, and 10 freshly sharpened number 2 pencils and a fresh coloring book. Let's go. Michael, I love that. That is so great. Eager anticipation of what we will potentially learn. What is up, Ego Foundation? That's our man. That's our man that Cadium. So Cadium, who is your buddy from California, man. He's
yes.
in the
Katie and I've been having some chats lately. He's a cool guy.
Oh, he is awesome. He is
Yeah.
awesome. I want to be strong like bull like he is. Paul Optus, seventh. Good to see you. And David Lee, back again from Southwestern Indiana. Good to see you. Terrence here. I didn't know today was Friday until I got this notification. Isn't that funny? Kind of losing track of time. Steve is looking good with the facial hair. Absolutely. That's a good shout out for you. And Hexy Quinn, always
Yeah.
bringing the love to the stream. Thanks for being here. All right, Steve. So let's do a little review. We've done this 13 episodes. I think we're at least to probably 28 hours, maybe more, because we've had a couple that have gone over 2 hours. Um, I wanted to kind of talk about the perspective and kind of distill down what I have been learning over the course of the last 8 months or so that we've been doing this.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you to kind of help folks understand this in its practical sense, because I've been experiencing, I think, the fruit of our conversations, and it's really this understanding of who we are, right? You said one of the first things you ever said to me is, we have forgotten who we are, and understanding who we are in the context of creation, and who we are as far as um, people, right? Created sons of God, and we talked about the Elohim, we talked about the minister class of angels, and we also talked about the serving class of animals. Um, from a review perspective, if you were to start with someone brand new and you say, "Hey, I want to kind of expose you to this conceptually," where would you begin? Like, what are the kind of the starting points that make sense to say, "Hey, we've forgotten who we are. Who are we in Jesus? Who are we in the context of this creation?" Because a lot of what you talk about is, Jesus revealing to you how it's designed, right? That this isn't like some surprise. No, that there is an actual structure and order to this. And that's what I think is incredibly refreshing is, well, yeah, of course there's structure and order. He's a God of structure and order. Where would you begin with folks to kind of introduce this big, I think, perspective change?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. The place that I would start is where I normally start with everyone, is one of interest. Are
Yeah.
you really interested in knowing how this works? Are you interested in why we're here? Not just us as individuals, but I mean, take a step outside and look around you, and who's the dude that put this together?
Yeah.
And how did you do it? And more importantly, why did you do it? And so that's probably where I would start. Are you interested um, in in considering a different point of view, a different perspective? And it's interesting because it doesn't matter what the person says in their answer as much as how they then posture in their response. Because a person who's really interested, there are virtually no barriers up. It's yeah, tell me more kind of a posture. And so to a person who is, projecting that kind of a response, I would reply in a particular way. If a person's, regardless of what they say, but if they're shut down, then I would respond in a different way. So to begin with, it depends on the situation, the individual, and where we are. So let's take it from the standpoint of a person who's interested.
Yep.
Um, is I would begin with something as simple as how did you develop relationship with your mate?
Hmm.
How did you develop relationship with your children? Take your best friend and who is it? Who is it? Think about them. How did you develop relationship with them? Name one that you've developed a meaningful relationship with where you did not dialogue,
Yeah.
where you did not exchange words, thoughts, ideas, feelings, intentions, emotions, you know, plans, challenge, talk, name one
Yep.
where that wasn't the core of your relationship, beginning with interest. What's going on with you? I'm more interested in what's going on with you than what's going on with me. Now, there may be times when I need to just lay it all out there and have a listening, supportive ear, but those are the rare exceptions. Name one where you haven't built a meaningful relationship without talking with them and listening to them and being more interested in them than you are in yourself.
Yep. That's
There's
incredible.
not one.
Yeah.
There's not one.
Not one.
So guess what? So it is with God.
I think that's so incredible to it's interesting. I feel like a lot of the structured religious order of things is um doesn't start there.
No.
right? And you told me this story. I love the story. When you were 6, I think you said, when you're 6 years old, the pastor said in the church, he said, "I'd like to introduce you to Jesus." To me, my favorite introduction wasn't your response, "All right, where's he at? Where's he
Yeah.
at?"
Yeah. Anybody out there want to get to know Jesus? Yep. I'm here, man. Well,
And
where is he? Let's do it. Well,
just like a 6-year-old.
yep, go in the back room. Hey, I'm going, man.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
how cool is that? And that's something that I think is so incredible about the longer you journey with Jesus, the more you realize that, this context of a father, which has hierarchy to it, is so, um, because I think a lot of people haven't had like really great dads, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that a lot of times they project what their father figure was as that, well, that's who God was. Because my father was either absent or harsh or difficult, controlling or whatever. And it's like it's hard to kind of, you know, I think get past that sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's part of the upside down world, the perversion that we live in. Um, from a spiritual conflict standpoint, we talk a lot about it, but we don't spend any time saying, Jesus, what does that actually look like?
Hmm.
We talk about binding and loosening, and we talk about certain things that we're told through the church system of authority of the believer and all of these various things, but nobody really tells us what the heck is going on and why is it happening that way? What is actually in play? And so we're taught to think about certain concepts, but never really step into the reality of what they are actually about. Um, in the way that God has designed the creation to function. There are all kinds of, well, they're not all kinds, but there are a couple of stories in the New Testament about people who tried to use the name of Jesus, for example, for their own benefit. It did not go well for them, you know. And yet, on the other hand, Jesus asked this very powerful question to the religious leaders of his day who were accusing him to be of, operating under the power of Beelzebub. He said, then by whose authority and power do your sons cast out demons? So, Jesus is always about wrecking your head in terms of what you think and how you think things are done, not for the purpose of putting us down, but to put us into perspective.
Yeah.
See, that there is something bigger going on. Are you interested? Oh, now we're back to that interest word. Are you interested in learning how this actually works? If you are, come on, I'll show you. And let me tell you what, it's very different than what you think.
Well, I think that's a really good, kind of starting point, right? So you're saying, hey, do you have interest in understanding more about how this works? And do you recognize that you can't develop a relationship with anyone without dialoguing or, so one, I think about dating, right? I
Hmm.
think about, you know, it's amazing how you'll see couples on the street and they kind of look like each other. I don't know if you ever noticed, like, they get similar glasses, kind of similar body shapes. And I think back to, it's almost like there's somebody for everybody, right? And it's this idea that you kind of have this type. And, when you see someone, I remember you telling the story about meeting your wife and like literally you were like, bam, right?
Yeah,
And I had the same experience. It was like it just hits you over the head and you're like, okay, where does that come from? But that is what is kind of this core of, hold on, why am I attracted and why am I interested? And why do I want to know more?
yes,
And I think
yes,
that that's, we see that in our human relationships. And, I've just been predisposed to be just super curious about things, but also very sensitive to the fact that, does this have value and benefit? Or is there fruit that is produced by this, right? Because it's kind of
yes.
the evidence of truth. Well, I think it's really interesting, just to use that metaphor. How many times does a woman have to say no to you before you get the picture, bro? Right? Like, that's the thing that's interesting, as you approach, right? Is there willingness to accept that approach? And
Yeah.
this idea of, courtship is kind of an old school term these days, but
Yeah.
this idea that we would, um, have intention to intentionally get to know someone. And how do we do that, right?
Yeah.
Well, we would go a courting, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so let's talk about that. So I assume that there are people will be listening to this who go, you know what, I'm interested.
Yeah.
But also I think there's this a little bit to say, well, how do you know, Steve, what this is? And what you've said to me, and I want you to kind of extrapolate on this, is you never said, listen to me.
Yeah.
What have you said? You tell everybody.
Yeah. You listen to Jesus. He's the guy you're wanting to know. Go ask him.
Yeah.
He'll answer, and then be patient. Don't prescribe how he's going to respond to you. Just be open. Okay, Jesus, hey man, I'm interested. How do you see this situation? This is what I'm thinking. Am I in sync with you? How is this going? By the way, thank you, Lord, for however it is that you will do it. You'll let me know what it is that you're thinking and saying and feeling about this situation. And by golly, if he doesn't do it
Yep.
in ways that are so adventurous. I mean, let me tell you what, this dude is worth hanging with once you take the time to get to know him.
You know what
He
I
is
think?
absolutely worth it.
Totally. And you know what's really interesting though is, how sometimes you feel like you have to have permission, right? To like, there's almost like this, and this is where I see my experience within the church is because there's not a lot of people talking about this idea. We talk about a personal relationship with Jesus. We hear that kind of thing, but there's very, very little in the how to. And
Yeah,
that's what's been so attractive to me about talking with you is that hold on, there's actually some how to this, and somewhat of a method in some respects, but very simply, well, how do you develop a relationship with anyone, right? This is the framework of things, but it's it's one of these things where because I think there are these upside down world barriers in the way, there's been a lot of times the method or at least the prescription of how to do this thing is go get quiet and read your Bible.
yeah,
And I'm not saying that's not a good thing to do, right? There's been certainly a lot of benefit by me doing that. But what's interesting? It's almost like somebody has to say, and I think a little bit, a big part of this, Steve, is you've been providing this almost permission to go, why don't you ask him? And
yeah,
it's so foreign to so many people. This idea, really? Would I like sit down in a chair with like an empty chair in front of me, just as a metaphor, and just literally say, what do you think about this? And expect to hear something. And I don't mean audibly hear something. That's not taught. I just be straight up. I have not, that's not the common. Now, I would say my grandmother would say, she'd talk about a still small voice, and she would talk about, she wouldn't use the same terms you use, but it's almost like, is there a bit of that where it's almost like some encouragement for folks to go, hey, try them on for size?
well, yeah. I mean, David said in the Psalms, quoting from Jehovah, come and taste and see that I am good. Come on, do this thing.
Hmm.
It's I'm inviting you. Come on, let's do this thing. What do you think we thought when Jehovah was speaking with Joshua and saying, I'll never leave you nor forsake you? I mean, I will not depart from you. I will not leave you hanging. Jesus said exactly the same thing. Oh, isn't that interesting? It's so it is fascinating how we will not attribute to the one who created us the same courtesy or expectation that we would require or give to another human being.
Hmm.
We somehow think that we're going to get to know him in a very personal way by him being silent.
Yeah.
Wow. In our world, if the father is silent, man, we're going to the psychiatrist.
Yeah.
We're whacked out. I mean, we're having all kinds of problems with a father who is silent, who won't speak. Well, now let's go back to the very first, stream, since we're kind of recapping, of thinking strategically. In whose strategic interest is it to silence God?
Wow. Yeah.
Well, that's a question worth asking. At least I think it is,
Oh, yeah.
you know. And so, okay, whose interest? God, is it your interest that in your interest that that mum's the word with you? And then, so the way that the religious order gets around that is by requiring us or telling us that we need to develop a relationship with him through the Bible. Well, I would just submit to folks, so why don't you split the time? Whatever amount of time you're spending developing your relationship with the Bible, then go ahead and give half of that time to saying, okay, Jesus, I'm up for developing a real relationship with you. What say you about the matter? And
Wow,
just see what happens.
that's very practical. And that's the cool thing too, is that I remember back September 10th of 2000, I made it really clear to him that I wasn't gonna believe if it wasn't real power.
Yeah, me
And
too. Yep.
you know what's so cool though is, I've been in church, and of course, there's always this little time maybe carved out once a month or once a year for somebody to tell their story. And I always loved hearing people's stories. But it got me thinking about the Bible itself. We call it the Old and the New Testament.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about the concept of the word a testament, which comes from essentially a testimony.
Yes.
And what is a testimony? But let me tell you a story about power or authority or an experience that I had that is worth telling.
Yeah.
And I think what's really, really cool about this is, what is this Old and New Testament? What is this testimony? And if you think about, history, the word, his story, well, I'm telling the story about what he did. And I think what's so powerful is this idea that every story that's ever been told happened. And I don't mean to prove that it happened. I mean that you don't tell stories of things that aren't rooted in some sort of experience. Now, you
Yeah.
can make up fiction, I know, but that's what's so interesting, is that these are all past retellings.
Yeah.
And what you have made me realize is that Jesus is in the moment.
Yeah.
And that one of the ways in which, Satan basically silences and confuses that is to say, stay out of this moment,
Yeah.
focus on the past, or focus on the future. Can you talk about that as it relates to the Bible? Because to me, hey, this is what happened. Like, remember this? We came out of Egypt. That's good to remember, but that happened.
Yeah.
We talk about that past, present, future, and how important that is.
Oh yeah. It is, again, going back to our strategic, discussions from beginning with the very first episode, is that if you look at where we are, you look at life, you look at these things, and you only see them from an event orientation, which is how we're trained to view life, is in the event. Well, what it does is it tells you the importance of the presence and how it can be used to manipulate you, but it doesn't tell you how the present can then inform you about what's going on behind it. And that's what Jesus does in the present, is he enables you to begin to see what is occurring in the present from a strategic point of view, in what's happening behind it and where it's heading. Okay, so the way strategically that the kingdom of darkness stops that, and we see it even operating in the human realm, very effectively, is by getting you to focus and really stay centered in either the past or the future, while just skimming the present sufficient enough to react to it.
Yeah.
And once you react, you're done. See, you are now the second action to the first action, and the first action is now controlling you. And you will go exactly to where the first actor intended for you to go. So this, from a strategic standpoint, we've talked about it from just a conceptual standpoint in the past, a couple of episodes. But from a strategic standpoint, it's absolutely essential from a adversarial standpoint to keep us no more than skimming the present in order to create a reaction to it. And the reaction could be what we would call good. It could be what we would call evil. It could be what we might call dangerous or beneficial. It can have all kinds of those elements to it. But the intention is for us to skim. Why? Because the only place we live is in the present. We don't live in the past. We don't live in the future. We only live in the present. And so if we can be put into a reaction mode in the present, then we can be controlled. We can be controlled by the way we think, by the way we behave, by the way we, relate to others, all out of a reaction orientation. Guess what? That's how a slave, well, that is how one is enslaved. So, you talk about, from a crypto standpoint, wanting, sovereignty. Well,
Yeah.
how in the world are you actually going to operate with any measure of sovereignty? Well, you can't be a reactor by nature. You must be a proactor by nature. That's how a sovereign works. So a sovereign sits back, looks and sees what's happening around, you know, evaluates and scans the spiritual landscape to see what's happening, is not moved by what they see in the present, but what they see is a window into what's happening behind it. And you start surveying what's behind it. And then, okay, Jesus, how are you seeing this? You are smack in the center of this thing. What is going on?
This is
Whoa.
yeah, yeah, this is so huge, and it's this is what I've taken away from that over the past 8 months, Steve, and it's been so tremendous. Is you said, and we talk about this a lot. Jesus is alive and he speaks.
Yeah.
Well, that means he's in the present now
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
with us now, right?
No, at this moment.
Well, yeah, at this very moment, and you think, you know, how do we control people, right? How can we control people? And I think about this. One of the takeaways for me is this: there are no more oh no's.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how I would put this into practical use in my own life. There are no more oh no's, and my buddy Ray and I talk, all the time, right? Every single day about these things, and it's always and you just think about your own life. You listen to a friend or something. I mean, pretty much everyone I observe is complaining about something, right? And when people are complaining, they're reacting to something. And I think about this idea of drawing one off sides. And of course, in football, this is so obvious is that, what's the hard count for? It's to get you off sides because I want to get that extra 5 yards without having to work for it. And when I can draw you off sides, when I know that you're reactionary, I have ultimate control, and I see this in relationships. I see this in my own marriage. I see this with manipulation. I see this with communication. I see this with the tenets of negotiation and power. Is and we see this a lot on social media. Is people drawing others off sides so that they can win, right?
Yeah.
So that's this idea of me winning over you, and to take that into this spiritual discussion is to say, you know so many things here, y- you know the that you don't want to be, or at least the evil forces wouldn't want you to be proactive, wouldn't want you to be content in any and every situation, would want you to be off center and off balance. And so much of that is almost a way of living for a lot of people, is this idea, what would it be like? And I think that one of the cool things is the power that I've experienced through a relationship with Jesus is peace in many circumstances in which everyone else would be freaking out.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, that seems to be kind of a fruit of this spirit, right? The fruit of this is this idea of, hold on a second, let's look at this for what it is, and to think that we have Jesus to ask in the very moment to say, "Hey, how do you see this? Well, how should I be reacting to this?" Rather than, or how should I be processing this? In that whole "there are no more oh no's"
Yeah.
is even in traumatic situations, it almost seems like there's this provision that happens. It's like we get really worked up about things that really aren't important, but then something really serious happens and you're strangely ordered. I've seen that many times in my own life. Speak to that, the practical application of that, because I feel like that's a huge part of the upside down world is if I can just keep you off balance, I've got you.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's let's point to one that's very practical. Okay. I mean, to me, all this stuff is practical. It may start with a conceptual idea, but behind the concept or inherent with the concept is something that's very real and practical that has meaning and impact in life, and not only in life, but in both dimensions of life. So why is it that we say we are spiritual beings, spiritual and material beings, and yet the spiritual world is totally foreign to us?
Yeah.
Why is that? See, we're told that we're body, mind, and spirit. That we're a makeup of various things. Uh, we're our physical body performs certain roles. Our soul, our mind, our another function. We are spiritual and eternal. Well, if we are spiritual, then why is that? Are we totally blind to what it is to be a spirit, not only a spiritual person, but how the spiritual world functions? Why is that? It's to keep us off balance. It's to keep us in some way either ignorant
Distract.
or fearful or your point, distracted. You know, it, it is designed to keep us from moving into the, if you will, the totality, the reality of who we are. It goes back to one of our early discussions. We've forgotten who we are. Well, why did we forget? Because one of the natures or one of the impacts of sin, as it exists in its reality, is it removes memory from us. The word actually means to lose, to not have a share in something, to lose that share. Well, what is the share that we lose? The reality of who we are and why we have been created. We've lost it. We don't know. So when a person is lost, what are they? How are they lost? Why are they lost? They have lost who they are in the essence of why they were created. Guess what? It's not just that you were created, to be a CEO or a secretary or a professional athlete or an actor or, a plumber. No, not a husband, not a wife. No, you are created to be something that transcends time. Well, that is what operates in the spiritual world. Well, wouldn't it be fascinating to discover that what we are doing in this present life is actually setting the stage and beginning the training process for what we do in the next life?
Hmm.
Well, that is exactly right. So, wait a minute. Those two things are connected. How come I am totally ignorant about what's happening in the spiritual domain? Well, there's a strategic reason for that. It's to keep you off balance. It's to keep you off guard. It's to keep you, under control so that you become a reactor as opposed to a proactor. So that's the practical side of it. And then think about the impact of that. I mean, you said it just a few minutes ago in the green room, right? You were talking about not being able to hear, Jesus with an audible voice, and then you went right into a story that was a high profile, high level engagement and you knew exactly what was going on, so much so that you precisely articulated exactly what Jesus was saying in that moment.
Yep.
Well, that's about as audible as you can get.
Yeah. Well, and to extrapolate on that for folks that are watching, you know, I met someone who's probably in the top 50 most wealthy people on the planet Earth. And what has been really helpful is the wisdom and discernment from the language the person used, and being able to discern and to understand the motivations. And I think that's one of the most amazing things that I want to kind of transition into a little bit here is you talked at the generosity conference about the high places, right? Looking
Mm,
up at things and looking down at things. I'd love for you to go there. But
sure.
this idea that I feel like in that experience, when listening to this man speak, it became abundantly clear what his motivations were. And of course, I thought of him as the rich young ruler.
Mm,
It's almost like I have to take all of this massive amount of wealth and everything that I have stored up for myself and protect it, right? Because I want to pass it on to kids or whatever. But the fundamental purposes of anything in the blockchain we discussed or anything that he was talking about or thinking about was in relationship to protecting what he had control over.
yeah.
And but it was underneath this guise of humanity. And I pushed back on that, and I asked him that question. And, it was challenging to him, and actually I gained a lot of respect from him for questioning him because I can tell a lot of people fawn over him
Yeah.
because he is so wealthy and is seen as having such power in this world, and I'm just, like, kinda calling BS on it, going, "Hey, you say this thing, but then what you're really doing, it sounds like, is just trying to preserve your own hide." And so that what that thing is, right? What I've the real practical that I've experienced is that by listening and having this perspective, let's say not a looking up perspective, but of Jesus's perspective of things, is that if you have that discernment and are not going, oh no, right, and freaking out about
Mhm.
stuff, and you're proactive, that he will in the moment, in real time, give you the discernment to understand what you're facing.
Yes.
That's real power. And when you think about and it's just it's an amazing, and you think about this idea of being able to understand the differences and to understand what is at work and what is speaking, and a lot of this is what is at play and what is at stake. And what I love about what you have shared with me is the spirits can't help expose their intention and perspective. It comes out in their language, and, I admire your, um, patience, but I know that you're gathering a lot of intel by listening,
Yeah.
and so many people are just talking this idea of, "Hold on, let me listen to this and have that right perspective." If I'm not, "Oh, no," because so many people, like, get triggered and are reacting to things. No, no, this idea of having this sense of peace in these things is to absorb this and go, "All right, how do you see this?" And having that dialogue in real time with Jesus to say, "Well, that is, like you're saying, almost an audible voice, right? This is the proof of the spiritual nature of discernment and awareness." How does how does one go from, you know, kind of this reactionary to proactive with perspective of looking up versus down? How would you, because I thought that was a beautiful example that you shared at Gen Con. Do you mind sharing some of that?
Sure. For those who are listening that weren't at Gen Con, we'll kind of start there. We were talking about that um, in the Old Testament there is this concept of high places, and what occurred at that time. It was very common to build an altar to um, the guardian god of that area, to build an altar on what they called a high place, which would be the highest visible place in that area, and then which was in contrast in the discussion at Gen Con, in contrast to the invitation of Jesus in response to the past tense statement that God has set us with Christ in heavenly places, past tense. So if you look at those two perspectives, one is looking up at one who calls itself a God that is still fixed and planted on earth, as opposed to sitting with Jesus in heavenly places looking from his perspective. And the fascinating thing about it is that when we look to the high place, we're actually looking to one whom we have built and whom we have invented, asking that one to do more than enable us to do more than what we're capable of doing. So we're looking upward at something that's fixed on earth that we ourselves have created as a God, and then expect that God to enable us to do more than what we ourselves are capable of doing when we are that God's creator. As opposed to sitting with Jesus and then surveying from his perspective the spiritual and physical landscape to see what he's seeing so that we can respond and work with him in the reality of that moment. Well, those are two totally different perspectives. One is an earthbound perspective, one is a heavenly perspective where we're seeing as Jesus is seeing. Well, guess what? Did Jesus ever react? Okay. Who have you come after? We're coming after Jesus. I am he. Boom, knocks them on their keister. They get back up and he says, is there some place you want to go? Let's go. Pilate, hey, don't you know who I am? Don't you know that I have the authority to either release you or crucify you? Jesus, you would have no authority over me if it was not first given to you from my Father above. You would have none. ... Now here is the kind of thing that happens when you're talking with Jesus about these things. ... And oh, by the way, I might be giving some thought to why he's putting me under your authority right about now. And I'm just not talking to you, Pilate. I'm talking to the one who's yanking your chain on this one. Okay? I'd be given some serious thought as to why my Father is putting you under your authority at this moment. Something's about to go down. Have at it. And just not without an ounce of arrogance or any kind of blustering or power display, just speaking what is true in the moment, that flows out of this clear perspective of learning to live with Jesus in the moment. He is not one bit flustered about anything. And to think that we have not just the ability, but that's how we were created to live with him. So a person doesn't wake up one day and say, oh, that sounds good, I'm going to do it tomorrow. Well, name one new skill that you've developed and became proficient at it one day. It's not how it works. It works by this practicing and learning to live with him and watching that, hey, this thing is really more real than what we consider real. You've had that experience.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, gee whiz, we talk about something, it blows your mind. I think when you talk about it so often is, wow, that's really big. And then within the next day, sometimes within the next few minutes, you're right smack in the center of an experience that's saying, that's what I'm talking about right there. That's not me talking. That's Jesus talking. This is what we're talking about here. And you just described an example of that a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
So it's
Well,
very, very real. I mean,
yeah.
this is not hocus pocus stuff.
No, and I think that that's a, in a practical sense, people think about what is wisdom, what is discernment, and you think about a lot of this is having the right perspective.
Yeah,
And, you just talked about these high places, right? I think about the Asherah poles, right?
yeah,
Building these things that we look up to, whether it's a golden calf, whether it's the Bible, the book, the written words on a page book,
yeah,
whatever it may be that I mean, it could be a sports team, it could be a spouse, it could be relationships, it could be drugs, it could be money, but these things that we look up to.
yeah,
It's really interesting. I love the metaphor, right? This idea, are we looking up to this? Well, I like this idea because throughout the scriptures it talks about ascending, right? Ascending and descending. It talks about Father in heaven. We see this kind of separation on earth as it is in heaven. And we have this general sense of direction, right? Kind of
yeah,
down is bad and up is good. And so what do? We create our own these things, these high places, right? We think. And of course the Tower of Babel is a great example of this. So we're going to
yeah,
build up there.
yeah,
Um but to think that our perspective could change and that could make all the difference. One of the things that I see as an additional barrier in this is that I think so many people within the church have been taught that this is about conversion and
yeah,
about really, I think a lot of people get hooked up into this idea of salvation and this idea that this is this momentary thing. I think what's so refreshing about this approach, Steve, is to say, we jokingly say, let's try them on for size. Take 50% of your time and just cultivate a relationship. Well, what does that look like? You can ask him what he
yeah,
thinks. You
yeah,
can ask him what he thinks. And I think that some fear for a lot of people is, what if he actually responds? What if he actually gives me wisdom and discernment? What if I am like, you know, uh, you know, a lighthouse that is fixed in a mooring and the waves are crashing around me? What if I'm actually stable in the midst of a storm? What if he actually does share with me his perspective? And of course, when you back out, you know in a way, Jesus modeled this, all of the stories
yeah,
of his life, right? And we talked about this before. Satan comes to him in all of these pictures of, well, hey, I'll give you all of this. Turn these bread into stone, these stones into bread. And he's like, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And I think about this idea of it coming out,
yeah,
coming forth. That's a momentary thing. It's a time-based thing that says now it's coming out.
yeah,
Peter, James, and John are on the mountain of transfiguration. He says, the voice from heaven says, listen, this is my son, listen to him. That we not only see in that this hierarchy, but we also see in this momentary, like, listen to him. And when he walked this place, he modeled that perfectly. It's amazing actually when you start drilling down and to say, hold on, he wasn't reactive. He wasn't, there, I think probably the only, a couple moments of real humanity that we saw were, hey, is there another way we could do this? Right? He's literally sweating blood, right? And he asks the Father, remove this cup from me. He also asks him, hey, why have you forsaken me? We see these moments of his mother saying, hey, get some wine for the guys. We ran out. And he's like, my time, come on, woman, this isn't my right time. And we see a proactive Jesus and a non-reactive one. And it feels a lot like it's modeling it's modeling this idea that I don't do anything apart from my Father.
yeah,
And you could tell that Jesus was constantly in counsel with the Father.
yeah,
What I love about it is, why would we do it any differently? It's been clearly pointed out to us that, hey, listen to him. And that's so cool. This idea, why did he say I'm the way? Why would he say I'm the truth and I am the life? Oh, okay. So you're saying that this is how it's structured. Yeah, I'm the way that we do this. You listen to me. You don't have to like do it in the morning over coffee. You can listen to me at any moment.
yeah,
And so Do you see that same thing as a major barrier, that it's almost like we're so focused within the church on getting someone saved and getting someone converted that we're neglecting this idea that no, no, the creator of the universe is alive and he speaks and is available to you now, but it's almost like you have permission to ask him yourself. And that's what I feel like you've done for me. You're like, no, don't listen to me. Ask him yourself. That's all I've ever done. Try that and
Yeah,
see how that goes.
yeah, yeah, right on. Well, it goes back to this strategic, you know, engagement that we find ourselves in the middle of. I mean, listen, you can't talk about being saved and the power of God to save you for eternity, and yet there's nothing saved about you in the present that is far inferior to eternity. So which is it? Are we saved or not? Are we not saved? What does it mean to be saved? And man, you start asking that question, uh, they don't have an answer. The church does not have a meaningful answer, um, which I want to be very careful here. The objective here is not to slam the church. It
Yeah.
is to say, folks, kindergarten was great, but when you're 25 years old, it's no longer applicable to your life. It's time to move on. The church does not allow you to move on. It keeps you in a do loop, see, talking about the same things over and over and over and over and over again ad nauseum until, guess what? Why do so many folks, I was one, fall asleep in the church? Because I've heard the thing 50 times if I've heard it once. Let's please move on.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I can sit there and slam the church, or I can take a step back and say, Jesus, how are you seeing this thing? I think these people are a lot like me, and I think I'm a lot like them. Uh, the reason I'm coming here is because I want to know about you.
Yeah.
See, that's my 6-year-old story. I'm still looking for you.
Yeah.
See, somebody has told me, hey, if any of you out there are interested in getting to know Jesus, why don't you come on up here? Man, I sprinted. Matt, I'm still sprinting.
Yeah.
See, because and as I started and continued that sprinting, eventually it was sprinting outside of that thing that calls itself the church, because it was actually a stepping stone to a much greater relationship.
Yeah.
So, for anybody who's interested in that, hey, back to your try it on for size.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do on my part is I'm going to tell you the experiences I've had and the results of that, and to encourage you to try it out yourself. But as you well know, once we get into the conversations about it, okay, now it's time to take that next step. I'll give you some input. I'll give you some thoughts to kind of stimulate your thinking. But man, you got to go back to Jesus. Otherwise, you just become a follower of another concept and idea.
Yeah.
You don't become intimately related to the one you are sprinting after. Well, keep sprinting. Keep it up. Keep doing it.
Yep.
You know?
Well, it's interesting. I mentioned a couple episodes ago listening to this sermon. Ray wanted me to listen to the sermon, and I had that same discernment in that. And it felt like the term that came to me was Christian entertainment.
Yeah.
And, gifted speaker, funny, good reminders, true reminders, right? Very historical, context. And I've actually been paying attention a lot to say, it's important to be reminded, right? I read the Bible, right? I literally go, wow, yeah, there's a lot packed in this idea of the Exodus. This is happening to me right now. I'm being called out of something.
Yeah.
These stories are And all of these things are extremely helpful, and they communicate a very cogent concept principally. But there's this idea that, well, I don't live in that past, I live in this present. And to think that, so many people, I think, within the church, because it has been essentially neutered, but also has not been, a form of godliness, but denying its power. That really resonates with me, is this idea that, well, if people like listen to Jesus on their own, they wouldn't need us. And I look at what the church has been used in the past. I think of kind of, um, you know, why the Reformation even happened, right? This
Yeah.
idea that, hey, this is control, and you got to show up and pay your indulgences. You need to do the stuff. You have to come to the priest. You have to go through us. And as a form of power, as we think about crypto, we think about the financial world changing, we think about governments and lockdowns and authoritarianism and all these kind of things, is, well, anyone who wants to seize control and power needs to keep you in place.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that its core intention and purpose and the people that are within the church aren't well intentioned, but I do think that there is, because we have essentially put a book as a replacement of God, which goes directly back to this definition of Elohim.
Yeah.
We see that, hold on a second, who are we worshiping? Are we worshiping a living, speaking, breathing, active, non reactive, proactive Jesus? Or are we worshiping ink on a page from a printing press? Now, those historic stories are true, and the future, but that's the thing that's really, I think, almost dangerous, is that the adventure I've experienced and you've experienced by saying, hey, what do you think about this? You know what the theme right now for me is he said, I will make your path straight.
Yeah.
Rest not on your own understandings. I'll make your path straight. And that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And it's almost feels like Paul rode to Damascus blinded. Jesus speaks ahead to a man on straight street, removes the scales, and he makes a beeline through shipwrecks and whatnot to Rome. And
Yeah.
you think about this idea that, hold on, you will find yourself in front of kings, because it's not you, but is him, right? This idea of a straight path. And that's the thing that I see, is that it is an adventure, but it's one that I almost feel like we rest upon these retelling of these historical stories, because we I think a lot of times we're being taught by people who haven't experienced the real power of the living present Jesus.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, I don't want that to be judgmental, outside of saying you're right, that there is so much more to this, and he wants to help us understand this purpose that he created us for. And that's the whole theme of this whole thing. What? It's upside down. There's a lie essentially in it that is trying to keep you off balance, so that you're not listening to the live speaking Jesus himself. And that's what I feel like, is he becomes so much more accessible this way than having to do things through some sort of prescribed religious construct, but to say, no, the one who created it all is available right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the interesting characteristics um, of the Roman religious pantheon, uh, Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, all of those various, is it wasn't so much interested in the condition of the individual or in the relational elements. It was very procedural in its approach, so that man, if he wanted to benefit from the gods, whichever god that they were seeking help from, it was really highly dependent on the procedure that they followed in order to accomplish that. So it's very procedural in its approach. Um, and if you look back in, some of the old ancient religious practices, it's highly procedural. It's not relational. Well, now let's think about that from a strategic standpoint. Why is that important? Why is it that angelic beings that are seeking, who are wannabe gods, would structure their relationship with man, whom they are wanting to rule and to accept worship from, which they crave? Why would they make it more procedural than relational? Well, once you start thinking about that, it's because it becomes obvious. Once you find out who they are, you don't want any part of them. And that's exactly what Paul was talking about to the Corinthians when he said, hey, listen, folks, concerning the spiritualities, which has been completely mistranslated, concerning the spiritualities, I don't want you to be unaware, brethren, because by the way, you were sitting down and worshiping a rock. Now, how in the world do you think that rock got you to worship it? Pause and think about that. Okay, now step outside that dynamic and think about, what in the world am I now in the high place concept, looking up to something that's earthbound? The important thing is that your vision stops at the earthbound level. Okay, looking up in the high places. You're not looking up into the heavenlies, you're looking to something that is fixed on earth just like you are. Well, maybe there's a different way of approaching this. I wonder how many rocks I'm creating that I'm worshiping. And yet I created that rock. I'm the one who formed and put and painted the little face on that rock. What's going? See, so when you talk about it, when you attach pagan to it and you talk about it, it becomes foolish. And yet that's the very thing that Paul was warning against. Look at, man, don't call this stuff foolishness, because these guys are very shrewd in how they can get you to fix your eyes on something that's earthbound and call it God. And they will start incorporating procedures that will give an appearance of godliness. I don't know, we're back to what Paul was talking to Timothy about, that you quoted just a moment ago, that will give you a form of all of this piety and godliness and religious sanctity and all of that stuff. But in reality, there's no power to it. Why? Because you cannot be vested with any more power than what they themselves possess. Otherwise, you will be viewed as superior to them. So they'll make you think certain things while depriving you of any of the ability to actually do it. Unless, of course, you are completely in sync with what they're doing. Then they'll let you do about anything you want to do. Now we're personifying, using personifying language, but that's how it works. See? So back to some of the concept. This is not about creating a new religion. This is about becoming who we are and why God created us. So that if you're into crypto, guess what would happen if you've been entrusted with a sizable amount of crypto and you have learned to live every moment of your life with Jesus? would the use and benefit of that entrustment be different than if you just did it yourself? If you had a business, if you were entrusted with a business, what would happen if Jesus named that business and then directed you and partnered with you in how to exercise the duties and responsibilities of that business and then fulfill the purpose for which he created that business and then entrusted it to you? Would that business have a different outcome and purpose than if you were just doing that yourself like everybody else on the planet? They're not even in the same universe. Okay? So you can take that into family. You can take it into education. It does not matter. Jesus said this, Jehovah said this very interesting thing, I think it was to Ezekiel, that the leaves of the trees have been given for healing. Well, what would happen if somebody actually did that? Actually said, Jesus, what about them, their leaves? How does that all work? How is it that you have created healing in those? Guess what we're looking for? We're looking for God to come down and instantly heal people just because we say Jesus' name over them.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I'm not saying that isn't what he'll do. I've experienced it. I've been used in that capacity. So that's not the point. But the point is that he has created all kinds of things around us for us to live in with him as a place where we learn how to then operate and live in heaven for eternity. Well done, good and faithful servant, you who have conducted your life full of faith. Come and enter into the joy of your master, for you were faithful in a little thing. Now come and rule 5 cities. Now pause for a minute. Are you telling me there are 5 cities for one guy to rule? That's one guy. Just because he was full of faith. In other words, where does faith come from? From the very thing you spoke of earlier, from exactly what Jesus says. What comes out of the mouth of God is packed full of his faith that enables things exactly what he says to do to happen. That person was full of what Jesus was saying to him. And as a result, he was full of that faith and able to fully accomplish the very thing he was commissioned to do. And because he did, because she did, guess what? They now get to rule cities in heaven. Will somebody please pause and think about the implication of ruling cities? What does that mean? Jesus, what'd you have in mind when you said that? That's a pretty powerful statement. Okay? That what a person does on this planet positions them for something to be done eternally in heaven. I wonder if there are any problems in heaven when it comes to running a city. I wonder if there are any challenges. Okay. Well, we get an example of that in Satan's rebellion. That looks to me like a pretty significant challenge in the heavenlies. Why, Lord, I'm starting to open up things that really go completely against everything that I was taught about, the bliss of living in heaven. What's that all look like? Okay. Well, maybe I need to take the seat of the student again and say, okay, Jesus, I'm ready to learn. What do you have to say about that? Okay. Well, that's the life.
Yeah.
That is the life. Jesus said, I don't do anything apart from my Father. What he says, I do. What he speaks is what I teach. Where he goes is where I go. When I see him working, I work. I do nothing, not one thing apart from him.
Wow.
And guess what he said in John 17? Thank you, Father, that you gave me authority over all flesh, and that we have accomplished the work that you have given me to do. Now bless me with the glory that I had before I came. Whoa, dude. See,
Yeah.
you see where we're going with this.
Oh,
There
man.
is so much more than what we have been taught, and it is resident within the intention of God in creating us.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, let's do that.
Yeah. Let's do that. You know what? You mentioned the leaves of the trees. I want to give you an example of this. So, Michael, who runs a global health company, and they are kingdom minded people that are listening to Jesus. So they meet a man out of Brazil. And for the
Mhm.
last 30 years, this man in Brazil has been a biotechnical science guy who loves Jesus and has listened to Jesus for a long time. And Michael met this man, and he had published a bunch of papers about his work. And they got to know him, and they shared their story of John 10:10 and this idea of the kingdom of God, and this idea that what would it look like if our business, we led it in a way that was in the nature and character of God himself. And so I want this to be an encouragement to anyone who's listening to this. So here's what this man says to them. Back 30 years ago, Jesus told me that the trees of frankincense and myrrh were good for healing.
Wow.
And he started to do research at least 30 years ago. Well, it's interesting that the wise men brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh to give as gifts. And you think about this idea, what you're saying of the leaves of the trees being healing. Well, frankincense and myrrh are both this essentially sap, which is concentrated with this alkaloid that is this active ingredient. And what they have found, science has found, that myrrh has a active ingredient in it that's more powerful for pain relief than morphine, but a fraction of its toxicity. Well, frankincense, in this man's research, they've isolated, and he was the one that isolated the molecule, has the patents on it and all this stuff by listening to Jesus. And guess what that does? And you can look this up, like spend your time on Google or Chat GPT. Blastoma cancers have been
Mm.
cured with this molecule from frankincense. Cancer,
Wow.
curing of cancer of
Wow.
certain types of blastomas. And I'm not making this up. Like, you can research this stuff. And where does this come from? This comes from a man who is a science researcher guy who was listening to Jesus, and Jesus told him frankincense and myrrh. And what's amazing about that is, had Michael and his team not committed themselves and said, Lord, this is your business. We commit it all to you for your kingdom. What is it that you want us to do? And he made their path straight. And this man who was listening to Jesus, literally for 30 years, did research and all of this work to isolate what this is. And look, from the trees of the garden come the healing of mankind. And you
Yeah.
think about that provision. That's not accidental. That's not an act of evolution. This has been what's been said. And I take that story and I say to everyone that's listening, what would it look like if you led all parts of your life in the nature and character of the one who created it all?
Yeah.
And what if we actually turned this thing right side up, meaning we listened to him? We didn't react and go, oh no, but we actually said, all right, what do you think about this? What is your perspective? How do you want me to see this? You've entrusted me with this big bag of crypto. And this is the question I'm asking, Steve. And I've been seeing certainly the benefits of this, because you said something earlier so big. You're going to be in charge of 5 cities. Whether you're like, I don't see myself as a public servant, is irrelevant. The point is there's benefits. And you know what this feels like a lot to me? It feels like boot camp.
It
And a
is.
lot of people in our community have been in the military. I was not, my father was. And I think about this idea that there's weeds and there's wheat. There are sheep and there are goats. And it's like, harder than a man going through the eye of a needle, and the gate, this narrow gate. And I think about this as a somewhat of a filter. If we're essentially in training, because there's such promise that there is a future of eternal future, we're limited to maybe 120 years here. And in this process of what are you going to do with me, and how are you, I basically, the heavens declare, the trees themselves, the very nature of these things, and then us in interaction. I've given you love, I've given you relationships, I've given you metaphors, I've given you these stories, I've rescued you out of these things, I've taught you these things. And all I can hear him say is, follow me.
Yeah.
And what's amazing about that is this idea that as a shepherd, you said it many times, and this just resonates so much with me. The sheep recognize the voice of the shepherd. And when it's not the shepherd, they're on alert.
Yeah.
And what is the role of this shepherd? Well, the rich young ruler said, "Hey, sell everything and follow me." Well, hold on a second. And I think in that story is everything. Is
Yeah.
this idea of, well, I want to go my own way. Look what I have amassed for myself. And I think what's so great about a bear market in crypto is the fact that everybody's down, right? 95%. And you're like, people are crying. This is the best place you could possibly be. Because the question is, do you have the right perspective of the resources that you're entrusted with? And try it on for size. What would it look like if all of the things that you have authority over were given to him? In this sense, we're saying, hey, all of these things are yours. I mean, he says it, all the silver and gold is mine. What would it look like? What have you created for me to do with these resources that you've entrusted me with? Because there's so many stories of talents being given, and those that have been used them wisely have been rewarded. We see rewards in so many different places, and this benefits, and so many warnings that you've received your reward in full.
Yeah.
This idea of storing things up is to say, hold on. So the secret to this whole life, Steve, is you're doing the work. Hold on, you're saying, hold on, your yoke is easy and your burden is light, and all I have to do is listen to your voice, and you're out in front? You mean you're leading this thing? And you're the vine and I'm the branches, and I stay connected to you, and you carry me along a straight path? I thought, so I don't have to be like some muscle bound guy who's grabbing the bull by the horns and kicking down doors and making things happen, but that as I walk with you, you order my life to be in alignment with the very nature of how and who you created me to be. And the currency that you give for me is the joy of peace and all of the fruit of the Spirit, and this amazing, overwhelming sense of joy that I can't help but try to articulate to others.
Yeah.
It's just mind numbing, but so beautiful. And it's so evident that so many people at the height of career, at the height of achievement, feel so empty. And the question is, what if we tried to do this with him? What would be the implications of doing this with him? And I think, Steve, the reason I even got into crypto and started this channel and did all this stuff was because I felt called to it. I felt like there was more here than when Lambo. And the fruit of that is so obvious, and it's been so clear that this is, I think, what he's doing in the world. He's drawing people to himself.
Yeah.
And don't follow someone's prescription. Don't follow what Steve tells you or what I tell you. No, he is the author of it all. He's got all the information and knowledge, and it's his work. The question is, why not align ourselves with the very framework of creation?
Yeah.
It seems like There's a lot of benefits to doing that.
Well, I mean, think about how we describe the Garden of Eden and then how heaven is described.
Yeah.
I mean, gee whiz, the Garden of Eden is, place of, paradise on earth. I mean, I've not heard of a single person, talk about the Garden of Eden in any kind of, you know, language of lack. I mean, it was spectacular. Well, who created that? Whose vision of an environment worthy of is man living in? I mean, it's self-evident. Now you talk about, John's descriptions of heaven with streets of pure gold that are translucent. The gold is so pure. Well, that's a pretty extravagant guy who built that.
Yeah.
You know, a gate of pearl? Really? What? There is nothing on this planet that compares with those descriptions. So, whatever it is that God has in mind for how life is to be lived, it is way beyond anything that we can think or imagine. And yet, you begin to get a sense of that just simply as you begin to live with Him. It is so simple. It's mind blowing how simple it is. Just say, Jesus, is this for real? If it's for real, I'm in.
Let's go.
Let's do it. Teach me how to do it. Hey, you say that I'm supposed to live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Jesus, we both know I don't have a clue what that means. So will you teach me how to do that? And oh, by the way, in that request is also a promise. I'm not going to tell you how to do your job.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what it's supposed to look like or how it's supposed to look. I'm just going to say, teach me how to do it. And at the appropriate time, let me know in the way that only you can that it has happened. And just go.
Yeah.
Let me tell you what, all the stuff that we have been taught vanishes into insignificance.
Yeah.
Because you begin to see and participate in what is real. And oh, by the way, that terrifies Satan. He knows that's what's coming. He knows it's actually happening. You're an example of that. Carter is an example of that. Joe is an example of that. Mike is attempting to move into that. He's thrilled. Katie, I mean, it's just happening one right after the other. And what's happening, by way of example, you and I have never sat down and had an expository teaching on some passage of the Bible, have we?
No.
No, we barely mention it. And yet, guess what's happening? Simply because you've said, okay, Jesus, I want to give a whirl at this. Beginning with, listen to this man, and you said, okay, I'll do that.
Yep.
Hey? And hey, your own life is showing it.
Yep. Well,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. What's the fruit of this tree?
Yeah.
What's the byproduct of this, right? So, you know what? One of the things that came up at Gen Con is we talk about how language changes, right? One
Yeah.
of the things that we see affecting us is this when we understand who we are, our language starts to change because we realize how much we've been kind of trained to think.
Yes.
And one of the things that was brought up, and I thought it was a really important point that we've never documented on this series, is this idea of doing something for God. You made a really, really powerful point that I hadn't heard before Gen Con when someone said, doing something for God. Can you speak to that idea? Because so many of us are like, I want to do something for the Lord.
Yeah.
And um And help us understand that perspective, because I thought that was tremendous.
Yeah. Like everybody, I use that vocabulary myself, and I have observed how my vocabulary has changed over the years. And oftentimes, with Jesus stopping me and saying, "Steve, what do you mean by that?" So one day I was doing exactly that. And by the way, this was in response to somebody talking about wanting to do something, for God with all sincerity,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just like most of us. Okay. And so I told the story about how I was in this, Jesus, I really just want to do this for you, and what's going on, and I was having a lot of trouble in my life, and you know, Jesus, I'm trying to do all these things for you, but, and he stopped me mid-sentence and said, "Steve, what do you mean you're doing these things for me?" Well, like most things, I have no, well, what else would I be doing?
Yeah.
Kind of a response. And so he started taking me through a process. When somebody works for you, they perform a service, and then what position does that put you into?
I got to pay.
Ah, I got to pay. What is that called? I had no answer. That's called an obligation.
Yeah.
Okay? When somebody works for you in exchange for a wage, then you have incurred an obligation to them. Steve, are you trying to obligate me to you? Matt, I never even thought in those terms.
No, and that's so big of an idea.
No, you don't work. You don't work for me. You work with me.
Hmm.
You either work with me or you don't.
Wow.
And you want to know something? That's exactly what he said. He who is not with me is against me. He who does not gather with me scatters. There is no for in the kingdom. There is only with.
Wow. So let's say that again. There's no, you can't do something for God because you can't obligate him. It's tremendous. That idea that we got to stop using that terminology. But how amazing is it? I remember when I was 15, my grandmother sold me her 1978 white on white Cutlass Supreme with the Landau top.
I remember them well.
It had a 280. It was the weakest V8 there was, but I loved it. But it
Yeah.
had a lifter problem, and it just knocked like crazy. And my dad was a mechanic, and one summer he said, "Let's do the lifter job." And so he made me do it, right? He's like, "Hey, do this." And we put the masking tape on all the vacuum hoses and took off you take off the air filter, and then the carburetor, and then the intake manifold and intake manifold gasket. And then you expose the rocker arms and push rods and lifters. And I literally scraped sludge out of that engine with a spoon.
Oh,
It was
wow.
so, caked up in there. And of course, my dad smoked cigarettes, and, there was something so amazing about hanging out with my dad in the summertime, doing this with him.
Yeah.
And I know he loved it too. But I think about now that he's gone, and I think about how powerful that was, is that, we did the job, right? It took a while. We did the lifter job, and I learned about these things. But more importantly, I did it with him. And there were many occasions where I'm left-handed, and my dad we're building out the garage into another room, and he couldn't hammer left-handed into this part of the closet. He's like, "Hey, come here." And I remember how I felt as a kid, like my dad needs me to do something for him. He's asking me, right? And so
Yeah.
here's this father who's saying, "Hey, you're left-handed. Hey, you got something that could be helpful. Hey, will you hammer in this nail for me?" And that picture of that whole thing to say, God's capable of accomplishing anything on his own. But this idea that he loves us so much that he would want us to hammer in that nail with our left hand.
Yeah.
And what I love about this, which is so encouraging to me, is this idea of so many stories in the Old and New Testament, well, and amazing examples of this, of carrying the ark. And you made a point that I would love for you to share, this idea that the ark itself had like rings on it and there was wooden poles. And I suppose God could have put wheels on it. He could have made it fly. He could have done so many different things with this ark, but he chose for the people to carry it. And I think about the pillar of smoke and pillar of fire, and I think about this the shepherd out front, and all these things are being led. What's fascinating though is the power wasn't in the wooden poles. Can you talk about this idea of width and what that means in your hand?
Well, virtually everything, once you start seeing these kinds of things, when you go back into the old stories, it's just full of it.
Yep.
And you start seeing these stories in a completely different way. As a matter of fact, you start seeing them as Jesus sees them. And when you see them as he sees them, then you start understanding what he had in mind, why he set things up. So in the in the ark, the idea of the ark was that it was supposed to go out before people, and it was to be carried by by the priests, by the by the men who were called and assigned to carry it as a sign of partnership. It is the ultimate sign of
Yeah.
partnership. All the power to accomplish something was resident in the ark. All of the authority to do what God had prescribed to do was resident in the ark. But the mobility of that ark was entrusted to men.
Mm,
Men were the mechanisms by which God moved in the earth.
that's amazing.
And he partnered with men in the earth. So that is a picture of partnership where Jehovah was working with his man, not only to exercise the authority of heaven and to release the power of heaven, but also for man to participate with him as a partner in moving to wherever God was moving and acting.
Wow.
And the only requirement was that man not set his hand to the ark, that man not set his hand to the authority of God, to the power of God, to the purposes of God. He was to partner with him, but he was never to set his hand to it. Once he set his hand to it, it was no longer God's work, it was man's work. Boom.
Yeah.
Wow. See, so even in these little details, you see that throughout all of it. Here's another one. Okay, can you imagine Jeremiah in his day how this struck people? Israel was in a world of hurt. They were dealing with all kinds of spiritual engagements of foreign spirits that had then incorporated themselves into the procedural processes of their worship. They become very procedural themselves. And so Jehovah says, hey, Jerry, I need you to go talk to these guys. And here's what I need you to tell them. I need you to tell them that they can make all the cakes they want. They can do all the sacrifices they want. They can do whatever they want to do. That's on them. But that's not what I called them to do through Moses in the wilderness. But this is what I said for them to do, that they were to listen to the voice of Jehovah their God and to do all that he commanded them so that it would go well with them. And so we typically will listen and go, yeah, what's that all about? Well, think about what that sounded like to the people who heard that message from Jeremiah. What do you mean not to do any of this stuff? What do you mean not to sacrifice? What do you mean not to? Our entire religious system is built on this model. Well, you set your hand to it. See? No, this is what I commanded. I said to listen to my voice. That's what I said. Everything flows out of that. If it's not flowing out of that, then you're setting your hand to it. And guess what you're ending up doing? You're inviting the Queen of Heaven to come and reside over you and make you think that you are worshiping and serving God while instead you're worshiping and serving her.
Mm.
Don't do it. It's not complicated. Just listen to me. Oh, wow. That's exactly what Jesus said to Satan in the first temptation. Hey, no, we're supposed to listen to every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. I'm not hearing him. I don't need to prove anything. I'm not going to give you the dignity of causing me to react to your challenge. Once I do that, I give you standing. You have no standing. The full sum of your authority is to tempt, not to challenge.
Hmm.
I don't answer to you, devil. You have no standing here. The only one who has standing is my Father.
Wow. That is so amazing. You know,
I mean,
I even think about how they stole the ark, right? And when they stole it, they grew tumors and all of this stuff, and they were like, "Well, we got to give this thing back."
please take it.
Yeah, please take it. This idea. So let's take this into the practical world. You know, I think about my experience in business, my experience in life in general, and a lot of what we hear in popular culture of this idea that, manifest this future, go out and get what is yours. And there's a really interesting partnership here, right? When my dad came out of surgery, he had a lung resection. He came, he was loopy on drugs, and the first thing he said to me was, "Don't smoke." And, I get a kick out of it. My dad was a man of few words, but they were always really good ones. And it was a reminder. If you smoke for 35 years, you end up with lung cancer. And that's kind of the message that he told me. But then there's also this idea, well, yeah, when I eat fast food all the time, I put on a lot of weight. And when I, get a lot of debt, it restricts a lot of things. And when I don't take care of things, they fall apart. And so there's a framework to things, and then there's this stewardship of things, and there's a responsibility we have in partnership. But there's also this interesting perspective of, what does it mean to set your hand to it? And I think about this idea, Steve, of, well, it probably, it's probably a good idea for me to get a little exercise, right? Now, I think it's really very reasonable to say, all right, Jesus, how should I perceive my own health? How should I perceive what I'm putting into my mouth or what decisions I'm making? Help me with that, right?
Yeah.
Hold each thought captive in that context. And that's, I think, a really amazing thing is that there's nothing that he's not willing to speak into. But so much of what this upside down world is telling us is that you got to go out and manhandle this thing.
Yeah.
And everyone that I've seen that's manhandled it gets to this end point where they've achieved that thing that they think they wanted, and it's empty, and and they're still longing. And that's what's so interesting about this idea of contentment, because I deal with this so much. I mean, I'm a treasure hunter. The world is pregnant with possibilities, Steve. And I'm always feeling like there's some amazing thing just around the corner. But it also can be a real distraction and lead to discontentment. Like, man, looking around and going, well, I don't have what the other guys got, and I don't have what I don't feel, I'm putting my value in my bank account or comparison or all these things. What's amazing about it is that you can have that contentment and that guidance and direction no matter the circumstances. Um, and this idea of the ark and putting your hand to it, like they literally died when they touched it,
Yeah.
um, is such a metaphor for this idea of what if I were to live in a way where I didn't put my hand to it and I only did what you said for me to do? And that's scary to think, right? I thought I was in control of this life, Steve. But it's only scary when it's absent of a relationship of real power and value. And that's the thing I think is so scary is that people are like, well, I don't feel like I have this close father who wants me to hammer in a nail with my left hand.
Yeah.
But this idea of, well, hold on, we're cultivating that, asking him to show us and guide us. And I feel like the byproduct of that is contentment in any and every situation. And the question is, have you experienced that? Right? For all those folks that are watching that, I'm sure you deal with challenges, Steve, but this idea of holding these thought captive with Jesus speaking in the moment, he's constantly giving you his perspective. And what do I see in your life? Patience. I see you pausing more than speaking. And it's really, can you talk about that? Because it really, there's a clear practice of this in your life that is manifested in self. You seem like a very stable person, a very content person, not without challenge, but also one who is very patient and willing to listen. Can you talk about that idea of this idea of being content in not being um putting your hand to things?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for that, um, Matt. That means a lot. That means a lot to me because it speaks of the very practical results of Jesus working with a life and that life working with him. There is there is real produce that comes out of it. Um, you don't know me when I started, but I know me when I started. Okay. And so I had the benefit of hearing what you're saying and knowing where I started before you said it. See, so it is very, very real. And Paul describes it, the Apostle Paul describes it as learning the secret to contentment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. There's a secret to it, but the secret is incredibly simple. And that is when Jesus teaches you how to live with him, you start moving from a clouded view of life through all of the pain, all of the suffering, all of the negative of life into the reality of what he sees in life and where he's going. And let me tell you what, it swallows all of that other stuff up. Okay. Now, I could describe it through 1,000 different words, but the words fall short of, of the totality of it, which, by the way, you're expressing through the behavior that comes out.
Yep.
Now, I'm not trying to do anything.
Right.
See, the only thing I'm trying to do, see, is continue to get better at learning to live with Jesus. And what has happened is it's no longer an effort, it is an attitude in my life. It is a settled issue. Once it becomes settled, then you are no longer striving. And so what ends up happening, you start seeing things from God's point of view. And he's not a pessimist. He's not angry. He's not frustrated. He's not sorry that he's done anything that he's done. All the things that we have been told about him, what we have been told is a 100% description of Satan's character, not God's character. Satan is the one who's pissed off, not God. Satan is the one who demands worship, not God. See, Satan is the one who controls, not God. See, so all of these things wrapped up in this little thing we talked about some, few episodes ago about changing even the name Jehovah, into capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. It's that guy that's all upset and pissed and, but not God. He is perfectly calm. He's perfectly at ease. He is so full of enthusiasm and excitement and joy and anticipation. I mean, so when you come into that world, guess what happens? Contentment becomes a byproduct of that. It is a produce of starting to live more and more in that world. And it's not about you, it's more an observation of what is happening to you. And it really is true. You're changed, you're transformed. I mean, God is actually at work doing something in you to conform us to the image of his son.
Yeah.
See? And that's what happens. And by the way, see, that we have interpreted that as the son Jesus, which Jesus is the son. He is the picture of that. But there's a bigger picture involved in that. The son that as he sees a son, now we're back to the prodigal description. See, did the brother see the younger son in the same way the father did?
Nope.
How did the father see him? Wow, my son.
Yep.
Now this is my son. This is what it looks like to be my son. He's had choices. He's lived everything. He's participated in everything that the planet has to offer. And out of it all, he has come to see me for who I am. This is my son, in whom I am well pleased. That's the secret, Matt.
Yeah.
Just learning to live with it.
Yep.
Okay? So just do it.
Well, and I think some of the fear that people have is, oh no, if I walk this path, do I lose who I am? And I will say this: one of the amazing early discussions we had was this idea of a body with many parts. And I think I feel like what God has done is he's shown me that he's been with me since the very beginning.
Yeah.
And the things that I've been interested in, the things that I've been, strangely attracted to, the things that I've learned about, the stuff that I've been really curious about, I just continue to see these things be redeemed. And not to say that they were defiled previously, but it's almost like, no, we talk about custom tailored for you, right? I think about, your story is 6 years old, but then I also think about you reliving the baseball game you had just watched out in the, the backyard, let's say, but also leading up to your professional baseball career, and then that being applied to this, right? And I remember when I first met you, I said, hey, God has called me to unlock global generosity by giving. And you said, I've been called to men of the transfer. And I think about this idea that, well, not everyone's a hand or a foot or an eye or an ear. And that the promise of all of this stuff is that you're actually more fully you in him than you are. Because a lot of people think they're going to lose their identity.
Yes.
That, well, I have to be conformed to the likeness of this Jesus guy. I've got to be this Jesus character that I've learned about. And the idea of partnering with him is that actually what I've found is it activates and shows purpose in all of the potential pain and challenge that you've dealt with. And that it redeems those stories. And I go, oh, so that's why you had me so obsessed about gold, or why I was so interested in geology. So now I see this story that you've been telling on all this. And it's like, And then this idea of, well, are you interested in doing this together, or you want to continue to set your hand to it and go it alone? And that to me, it's a real encouragement because it's like it continues to build upon itself, and even some things that I feel like, maybe are regrets in people's lives, that they actually play a role in forming who we are.
Yeah.
And it's strangely connected, to the purposes, right? Almost as if these things were meant to for you to experience them, so that you would understand what you have been fortified to do. That's what I think so many people are looking for, is why was I created, and what is the purpose of all this, and how does it fit together? You're not losing who you are in him. You're
No.
actually gaining the fullness of who you are in him.
Yes, that is absolutely right. Can I share with you a story? I think I've actually told you about it before,
Yeah.
that the folks in the audience might be interested in this, to help them see their own kinds of stories. Um, I went to a business meeting. It was a really important business meeting. We accomplished everything we wanted to do. I was really excited about it. I could really see what I would, what Jesus was doing and how he was doing it and the things that he was showing. This partnership dynamic. To me, it was thrilling. Okay. And so I'm driving away, and my vocabulary for it is all of a sudden I start getting turned inside out, which means something is very, very wrong. And so I'm going back and I'm revisiting the meeting, and I'm looking at every detail and saying, okay, Lord, where did I screw up on this thing? Man, I thought we did a really great job. What was going on here? Did I somehow miss you? And I was going through all of this, right? And I mean, it was not a pretty feeling. Um, but I knew something was going on. So finally I said, "Oh, Jesus, I have no idea what's going on. I thought we had a really great meeting together. Uh, if I screwed up, I don't know I screwed up. What do you think about all of this? What are you seeing? Because obviously I'm not getting there. Why am I turned inside out?" He said, "Because you were trying to be humble."
Hmm.
I had no grid for understanding that. And you probably heard me use that term about 50 times already
Yeah.
in our streams. I had no mental, emotional, conceptual framework for hearing that. And I answered, "What do you mean I was trying to be humble? What's wrong with that?" Now, let me back up a little bit and give you a little bit of the backstory to that. Um, Professional athletes often are viewed as being pretty arrogant people. And I was chief among them. Wasn't trying to be, didn't think of myself, but I was probably a pretty arrogant human being. I was used to performing at the top 1% of my field. Um, there was only 30 positions in the entire world. I occupied one of them, and I was pretty good at it. Um, and so you walk around in this posture of confidence that oftentimes is viewed as arrogance.
Yep.
Okay, and I knew the game. I knew the game very well, and so being accused of being arrogant or being characterized as arrogant was really painful to me. So the more I started to learn to live with Jesus, I said, okay, humility started becoming a really important part because I saw it in him.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the backstory. So now we're coming in here and I'm asking Jesus about this, and he says, what's going on here? What's happening? He says, you were trying, why is this going on? He says, because you were trying to be humble. I said, well, what's wrong with that? And he says, whatever you are trying to do means you are not. And so you are attempting to manufacture it. And when you manufacture it in your own image. And I said, well, Lord, what do I do? What's up? He said, just follow me. Quit trying, just follow me. Now, in that is a picture of what it is to put your hand to something.
Yeah.
I was trying to manufacture what I thought humility looked like. And so in manufacturing it, I was creating in my own image of what that looked like. But it had nothing to do with what humility looks like to Jesus. And what was his remedy? Just follow me.
Yeah.
Just follow me. That's what it looks like to put your hand to something with all good intentions, with all sincerity, really attempting to be everything you wanted me to be, but not having the realization that I cannot create in me the thing that I lack in me. Can't do it. No more that I can tell him what he needs to do to fix me when I can't fix myself. Why would I think I could tell him what I need him to do for me to help me accomplish something, help me to be better, whatever, if I don't even know how to do it myself? That's what it looks like to put your hand to something. It's not and guess what he said it was? Partnership was simply following him.
Yeah.
See, just live your life and follow me. That's what partnership looks like.
It reminds me of a story, and we'll wrap up with this. I knew of a man who he and his wife adopted a baby girl from China, and she was very young, 2-ish probably.
Mm.
And it was pretty clear when they got her home that she hadn't been fed well, right?
Mm.
And so they would put Cheerios out on the high chair, and she would always not only stuff Cheerios in her mouth, but she would hold on to Cheerios in her hands. She
Mm.
would grasp onto them. She didn't want to lose them.
Yeah.
And of course, unlike the other children. And he told a story of how, she would not let go of these Cheerios. And of course, it's hard for him, to see this, because it's like, hey, and he said, I would have to lift her up and literally take her into the bathtub. And, she's going in for a bath, still holding on to these Cheerios. And he says, this little girl didn't know that her father provided way, way more than those Cheerios that she was holding on tightly to.
Yeah.
And of course, this huge metaphor for what we're doing, right? This idea that we think we know what's right. We think we know what is value. And it's so counterintuitive. And this is this whole concept of being right side up, is that we have a father who loves us, that is the provider of all things. And we are grasping so tightly. And if you think about it, a closed hand around the hoarding of these things that we're afraid of losing means we are unable to receive those things that are the real provision. And I feel like that's a real picture of putting our hands to things and resting in our own understandings. And Steve, I'll tell you, this is one of my favorites of all of our episodes.
Mm.
And it's really good reminder. And it's just another example too of how important we are to each other in our
Yes.
community and relationship. That,
Yeah.
we talk in terms of God speaking. Well, guess what? He speaks through others as well.
Yeah.
And I find that he's given us one another to be able to have, a constant reminder of these things, because we need encouragement. We
Yeah.
need to be reminded of these things, because we do get beat down and we do get tired and we do get weary. But this idea of letting go, opening our hands, and listening, um, what is the result of that? But it conforms us to the likeness of his son. And I don't see Jesus as arrogant, right? Or
Yeah.
trying to be humble.
Yeah.
And it's super powerful, Steve. This is fantastic stuff. Any last thoughts from you before we head out?
No, just thanks, Matt. I mean, just thank you.
Yeah. This is Guys, this is what it looks like. I mean, probably not as ordered, but we Steve and I have these conversations not only on stream but off stream, and it's just I'll get curious about something. I'm like, "Hey, Steve, what do you think about this?" And what I'm seeing more and more, Steve, is your guidance of, "Hey, listen to him." Is I'm seeing the fruit of that in him speaking and providing discernment and wisdom, and I told you the other day, he's like, "You don't need to call Steve about this one."
Yep. Yep.
And that's an important thing, I think, for people to know.
Yes.
Steve is no guru. This is not a follow Steve thing. This is a, hey, let's sharpen each other by being encouraged. And that's what you've done, and that's what you continue to do, because Jesus is alive and he speaks. And so thank you so much for not being one who's saying, "Hey, follow me. I have the inside track to Jesus and you got to go through me." Another system
Yeah.
of barriers, but one that is inviting you to meet this guy.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
appreciate that a ton.
You bet.
All right, Steve. I'll catch you in a second here.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
once
folks.
again. Episode 14.
There you go. Have a great weekend, folks.
Awesome. All right, folks. That's episode 14 with Steve Staggs. Powerful, powerful message. We think we know what God is doing. He always surprises me. That's what is so amazing about it. It's like you never know what the impact and fruit of things are. You probably had somebody who came to you and were like, "I just really want to thank you." And you're like, "What do you mean?" When you said this thing and you don't even remember you said it. And it's been so meaningful. That's what Jesus does. He takes these things and helps us, right? And what you think might be impactful, it may be something completely different. And that's the beauty of it. It's alive, and Jesus is alive himself. And so, folks, the real purpose of this stuff is when you found the food, when you see that there's contentment and peace in these things, it's like you can't help but share this joy. And it's real. And I've told you many, many times, for 28 years of my life, I didn't acknowledge this stuff as real. And frankly, it wasn't of my he made me understand that it is true and it is powerful. But we're all in a journey to continue to build a relationship and understand this. But there's nothing more exciting than a life that is um, aligned with the one who created it all. So that's the goal. But also the goal is that maybe one day my kids and grandkids will actually watch this stuff. But thank you to Steve Staggs. We'll continue to do this as long as Steve's up for it, on Fridays at 11 o'clock Central. Take care of yourself, folks. Don't mess with Texas either. Take care. We'll see you soon.